Today's reading is from Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Jesus Christ said in the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 10, "Think not that I came to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth, that is to say, that clingeth to his life, shall lose it. And he that loseth, in other words, that giveth up his life for my sake, shall find it." God tests the firmness of our faith. The sword described here is the sword of discrimination. The struggle Jesus describes is not a war against unknown enemies, but the struggle with our own attachment to all that is nearest and dearest to us, humanly speaking. Ultimately, it is a war against the ego itself and against anything that which we surround ourselves to bolster the ego's fragile sense of security. When Yogananda as a boy fled to the Himalayas to embrace a life of solitary meditation, he was apprehended by his older brother Ananta and brought home again. At a certain point, before he would accept defeat, he whispered to his friend Amar, his companion on his flight, "Let us slip away when opportunity offers. We can go on foot to Rishikesh." But Amar, whose brother had accompanied Ananta, had turned pessimist, disclaiming any intention of continuing their adventure. Yogananda's memorable comment on Amar's refusal was, "He was enjoying the familial warmth." The spiritual warrior rejects that familial warmth. Rather, he claims the whole universe as his own. As the Bhagavad Gita puts in the 14th chapter, unaffected by outward joys and sorrows, or by praise and blame, secure in his divine nature, regarding with equal gaze a clod of mud, a stone, and a bar of gold, impartial toward all experiences, whether pleasant or unpleasant, firm-minded, untouched by either praise or blame, treating everyone alike, whether friend or foe, free from the delusion that in anything he does, he is the doer. Such a one has transcended nature's triune qualities. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
Well, today's message and reading is uncharacteristically stern, but there it is. I didn't assign it to myself, so here we are. Jesus Christ was definitely not all that politically correct, and he showed in his own life that kind of determination to live for God alone, that frankly is an embarrassment to the rest of us, and certainly to those who don't even have the intention. And so our message today is the affirmation of the need for austerity in our life. Again, a very unpopular word. And yet, isn't that what it takes to be successful in a relationship, to deal with your health and to your career perhaps? It takes effort, it takes energy, and it's certainly not foreign to us as a culture. We have our culture is known for high energy and inventiveness and humanitarianism and many other things. And yet when it comes to the spiritual path, we come to particularly yoga, characteristically meditation and yoga, for peace. And yet we have this message, and not just this message, which we could say, well, that's the Bible. Well, you go to India, and the great Bhagavad Gita is an exhortation to war itself. It takes place at least on a battlefield, and yes, the war is an inner battle, but nonetheless, it doesn't exclude the other as well. Curious, isn't it, that the Indian culture over centuries has become associated, at least not necessarily very correctly, but associated in any case, with peacefulness and so forth. And yet their Bible tells them to take up arms for war. We have our Bible in the West, which says turn the other cheek, and what are we known for? Well, I'm not going to answer that question. You answer it. People just screw it up mostly, whether in religion or anything else. And so this is not an easy message to kind of at least feel inspiration from. We all can pay lip service to it. But, one of the, downsides, if you will, to, for lack of a better or more correct word on my part, to liberalism, progressiveness, is that sometimes we're so liberal our brains fall out. In other words, we're so politically correct, we're so keen on not offending anybody, which is wonderful, who's going to argue with that, that we also lack discernment. Recently, I was invited by Padma to address her spiritual counseling class, and I had the task, as it were, to talk about judgment versus discernment. So many people, if you use a term that maybe is politically incorrect, or in that direction anyway, in other words, a term that describes a group of people in some way that's less than flattering, people assume that you're being judgmental. That's not at all the case. Not at all. It could be that, yes, certainly. But if somebody is a liar and you simply acknowledge that they're a liar, but you don't necessarily dislike them personally in any case, then you're simply telling the truth, the fact anyway. And so this ability to discern is actually something that we tend to lack, those of us who embrace the world and people of different cultures, etc., as our brothers and sisters, as well we should. And that's what the path of yoga represents, the oneness which is spirit, underlying all things. Our country itself represents the march towards freedom, transcendence from stereotypes and this kind of thing, personal liberties. But there it is, right in our face. Because when we say in our country that all men are created equal, that's an outright lie on a soul level. But it's, just look around you, there's stupid people, there's evil people, there's good people. So of course it's not true. But yet it's a deeper truth that we affirm. But if we affirm that and have an education system that dumbs everything down to the lowest common denominator, we degrade our culture. Don't you see? Liberalism itself can be false without discernment. One of my very first talks I gave many years ago, I stumbled upon this verse or whatever it is from the New Testament, and Jesus, not only was he politically correct and said, "The poor ye shall have always with you," and a number of other things, but the other thing that stuck in my mind that he said, that I pretty sure is right, was the basis for the sorry John, the Republican platform, was he said, "To those who have, more will be given, and to those who have not, that which they have will be taken away." You could laugh, but maybe you don't get it. All right. So what does he mean by that? It sounds very harsh and cruel, unfair, unjust even, but no. He's saying that when you put out energy on the basis of your convictions, whatever they may be, never mind that they be true, false, or neutral, when you put out that energy, you attract to yourself, you create in yourself the magnetism that attracts to yourself the very thing you're seeking. again, for better or worse, as spiritually or otherwise. This is the law of magnetism. Those who act like they're poor or paupers or insecure or whatever affirmation of lack, whether it be mental or spiritual or material, then they attract to themselves that lack. Now that's something that we can understand a little bit more in our culture, because we know something about magnetism, at least electrical magnetism, if nothing else. In a higher age, we'll understand this principle to great effect, because in a higher age, our minds will eventually become focused, telepathy will be normal, and so on, or so we are told. So I sometimes come across, therefore, people in a sort of liberal way of being who, if I say the sky is blue, I can depend on them to say, oh wait, there's a cloud over there. So watch yourself, because if you want to be totally truthful, then you shouldn't say anything. Because in a world of duality where everything balances to zero anyway, I mean, like me, I have to get up and say something, but I could come up with a counter statement with everything I say. Well, then shut up. So if you talk like that, if you think like that, basically you undercut the magnetism of your own power to rise spiritually, as well as any other thing. But here, of course, we speak in terms of spiritual growth. And so learn to speak with conviction. You know, on the issue of discernment, and sometimes you have to deal with people, maybe you're a parent or supervisor or dealing in any case with challenges, you may have to identify a person's shortcomings. And there's a story that our founder, Swami Kriyananda, who lived with Yogananda in the last years of Yogananda's life, he wasn't present for the story, but one of his fellow monks or a nun told him this, that one day Yogananda was just raising the roof in castigating, or whatever you call it, I think it was one of the nuns there for, I don't know what she did, but he was just thundering, you know. But every time he turned his back to her, this other fellow, one of the monks, was sitting there, he'd wink at him. And then he'd come back and he'd just thunder and give her the, fire and brimstone and so forth. Well, isn't this what we have to face as whatever role we are? And we have so many roles. Sometimes we're a parent, sometimes we're an employee, sometimes we're a supervisor, a child, etc., etc. Life is not so conveniently arranged that we can be milquetoast to everybody. Not to stand up for what we believe. Sometimes we, in a crazy place like this, we're not the Lutherans or whatever. So it takes a certain amount of courage to come to a place like this. And so it's not surprising that a number of our members might have a spouse or partner who is less than supportive. Well, it's a tricky thing to say all too clearly in general terms, but sometimes you just need to stand up for what you believe in. And not so much as a critique of anyone else, but that this is what I believe in. And this is what I'm doing. I'm taking classes in yoga or whatever it might be. If it's something that you truly believe in, isn't just getting a haircut or going to a bar or something, then stand up for it and be centered in yourself. It doesn't have to be a condemnation. It's typical on the spiritual path, and again, because what we represent here is a new wave of, as Yogananda called it, a new dispensation of spiritual understanding that's coming into the world, an understanding that embraces all people as children of God. Again, that's not new, but do most religions really practice that? No. And so, sometimes you forget what you're about to say. But it came back. It's typical. And as I say, because we're unusual, it's even more typical. But in any case, historically, that when a person grows up and feels a call to a life of spiritual seeking, it's most typical that one's family opposes you. And so it is in this reading. Remember that verse, Jesus was sitting there giving what we call a satsang, right, in somebody's house, and somebody yelled from the door, the place was packed, and he said, "Hey, your mom's here, and your brothers." And being the way he was, forthright as it were, a good Jewish boy, pardon me, he said, "Well, who's my mother? Who's my father?" He said. In other words, he used the occasion of basically being interrupted to say that, but that they who love God. And so we find that kind of opposition very often from our families. I was blessed being raised in a family where it was a tradition in our culture that the first child was given to God, or at least that one of the children went to a spiritual vocation, a monk, a nun, or a priest or something. And so, in fact, I studied for the priesthood. One of my older brothers is a Catholic priest still. You should see the emails we write to each other. I'm going to win if it kills me. Convert the son of a gun. He's a wonderful soul, but deluded. But I was fortunate because when I moved to Ananda village in California long, long ago, my parents didn't say too much. I left the family business to do that, so it wasn't like they were thrilled. But, they didn't say too much. They understood what it meant to follow your spiritual calling. Over the years, as Ananda grew and is now worldwide, grew from that small little community, which is now quite large and not only our original, but continues to be our largest community in California. We eventually developed, through the inspiration of our founder, Swami Kriyananda, that which acknowledged as well as invited the kind of commitment that we see. Spirituality, in our very lineage here, Lahiri Mahashai asked the great Guru Babaji if his message and the advanced techniques of Kriya Yoga could be given to all sincere seekers, whereas in the past it had been given only to those willing to leave normal life and be a monk or a nun or what have you. And so Babaji said, "It's the divine will that this be it so," he said. Problem we have, though, as we are evolving a new form of spirituality, which is breaking away from orthodox forms, it's difficult to know, well, what is spiritual? I mean, we know what it is in our hearts, or at least we think we do, I'm not sure. It's not just passing sentiments and petting puppies and that sort of thing. It's much deeper. It's this powerful conviction. We need examples of conviction, of dedication. But we don't look to the traditional form so much anymore. And so we need, as a culture, to reinvent, as it were. And so it was that back in the 80s, Swami Kriyananda had the inspiration, and he had waited a good many years, probably 60s, 80s, 20-some years if I recall, before he even broached the issue. But he said it's time for us to form a worldwide religious order to both energize but also to acknowledge that among many of you here at the community there, California, you have clearly given your lives to this work. Doesn't mean everybody has the karma or the dharma to do so. But for the work to grow and for there to be living examples of complete renunciation and dedication, we need now to do that. I know when I came, turning my back on orthodoxy and so forth, had that been in effect at the time, I would not have been inspired. It took years of my own dedication and so forth before I could understand what the power and courage of one's conviction actually meant from the inside, not just from the outside. In Yogananda's day, in the 20s and 30s and so forth, he forbade his renunciates who lived at his ashram from wearing things like robes and so forth. He said, let your heart be the hermitage and your robe, your love for God. But over time, he too realized that there needed to be some outward recognition and so forth. And so the Sevaka religious order, which is now worldwide, 400 plus members, is there for those who feel that call to give their lives to this particular work. And then just a few years ago, before Kriyananda's death, he had the further inspiration to create a worldwide Swami order for everybody, had completely disconnected organizationally speaking from Ananda, recognizing that in this new age, that what inspires people is the bliss, the joy of living for God. The bliss and the affirmation that we are Tattvamasi, we are that bliss. And that is what we seek. No more just, suffering and this sort of thing as the hallmark characteristic of spirituality. And that doesn't really inspire us. We all suffer anyway, so we might as well learn how to do it correctly with even-mindedness, that's for sure. Nobody gets away from illness, old age, and death, as Buddha tells us, and as he went forth to solve the great riddle of the mystery of life. But nonetheless, that isn't the emphasis in this age. We are positive people. We are energetic people. We are inventive, creative people. We don't need to hide and reject the life that this world gives to us. But we need new forms, and so he created this Nayaswami order. Naya means new, and no longer is it based on the old forms of traditional Indian Swami orders where you, like the Catholic orders, poverty, chastity, and obedience. Those are just mere facts. Those are outward things. Where is your mind? Where is your heart? And so ego transcendence is an inside job, but nonetheless, outer forms are needed to give living examples. Okay, and within those forms, there are some examples that are, let's face it, better than others, just as we find in traditional orders. We find scandals and this sort of thing. Okay, people are people. But we still need the form, because look at this body. This is a form, it's a temple. The real temple is here, it's not this thing. The Dalai Lama once claimed that, or said, I would that there would be no temples. Well, I would too, and I think in a higher age that will be true, because we'll have the deeper understanding that this is the true temple. As Jesus said, destroy this temple and in 3 days I will rebuild it. His stupid disciples looked around at the physical temple and thought he meant that, and he had to correct them and said, no, this temple. But we're not there yet. We're still very identified with our physical form, our gender. We have gender issues, don't we? The color of our skin, we have racial issues still, don't we? No, we're a long way from that highest age. And so we need places where people can express the courage of their conviction. And so it is that I have often said, I don't claim to have invented it or whatever the word is for that, but the symbol of the cross goes far beyond Christianity and Jesus' death on the cross. The symbol of the cross represents in its horizontal plane our relationship to the world around us, to our own body and personality. And in that, whether our energy goes out in trying to seek fulfillment through the senses in the world around us, in what becomes ultimately unsatisfying, even if, and that's if, we achieve our materialistic goals, it is not enough. And on the horizontal plane, it represents those who bring their energy in and become centered and learn to relate responsibly to the world, to the body, This is the basics of what Patanjali in the sutras calls yama, non-stealing, non-lying, non-sensuality, etc., etc., which we're familiar with. Most of the world's religions are focused on the nots, the do-nots. That's in some ways a baby step, and yet, you know, if this planet, if everybody on the planet lived by the golden rule, we'd have a paradise, but that's never going to happen. Never going to happen. Because reason is insufficient to change behavior. Because the world is designed to attract us, to go out there and seek money, fame, etc., pleasure, and so forth as our, summum bonum of life. And in that we are hurt and disappointed and so forth. And so in achieving success in life, we learn that we need to be focused, need to be centered and responsible and honest and so on and so forth. But even an atheist can do that. In fact, I know some really great atheists. A lot better than some of the so-called devotees I know sometimes. And so, but that's not enough. Virtue, human virtue, is not enough. We were born, created in the dim, distant past, that we might, as my Baltimore Catechism told me in first grade, to know, love, and serve God. To know means to become one with God. Now, and all the rest is details. This is the great teaching of the Vedas. Truth is universal. Truth is one, as we say every week. And so it's only on the vertical plane can we ascend through the power of the rising Kundalini. I just wrote an all too long blog on Kundalini, thanks to Michelle Foy there, who said I didn't address it sufficiently in a class recently, so okay, all right, well, I can't redo the class, so I better write something. But so we can't go into that today. This is the great teaching of yoga, that the entrenched vitality of our mortal delusion, our separateness, is the real dark night of the soul. The real challenge isn't getting our act together on this plane, not with intelligence and health and education and so forth. Anybody can do that, although it's very difficult. Very few people do. But you can if you apply reason and will, etc. But the greatest challenge to the soul's finding of its home in God and bliss that can never be taken away is to rise spiritually, to rise on the vertical plane of the inner spine, to rise that force which has given us the conviction of our separateness, which is the Kundalini force, to awaken her power and rise spiritually towards the seat of enlightenment in this body temple. This is the teaching of yoga. And all else that we do to improve our lives is very good, for sure. Nothing wrong with having a healthy life, a responsible life, a creative life. We must needs do that. We can't ignore the horizontal plane in favor of the vertical plane, because we have to become one with all the creation, because there is nothing but spirit. We can't reject anything. And yet we have to use our discernment. And more than that even, it takes the power of conviction to do that. And this is the Achilles heel of those of us who are broad-minded, liberally minded, and this sort of thing, is that we tend to lose sight of the discipline that meditation requires, the discipline that serving others demands of us, of the giving of ourselves. The various 400 and some, those of us in the Sevaka order that I mentioned, some more completely, more perfectly, as it were, than others, but nonetheless, I can certainly speak for myself and hundreds of other close friends that I have around the world, that we gave up all that the world could have offered us in order to serve a spiritual goal, which ultimately is our own liberation, but which we can never achieve by going off and hiding, by not sharing the pearl of great price with others as we are able to do so. This is the law of life. Jesus said it in quoting the Old Testament very simply. He said, the first law is to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and the second is like unto the self, to love thy neighbor as thyself. This is a great teaching. It's not an easy teaching, but it is what's necessary to become even materially successful. It takes conviction. And yet, when we achieve that, it's not enough. As Yogananda says in his autobiography in conclusion, he said, for wisdom too, our soul has a hunger.
I'd like to read to you Yogananda's words from Whispers from Eternity. Demand to eject enemies of bad habits. Fierce foes and obstinate idle habits of restlessness have often entrenched themselves in the territory of my heart. Let me defeat them all, bent as they are on robbing me of my wealth of inner peace. Lead thou my forces of calmness victoriously to the divine kingdom of fulfillment. Amen. I'd like to give you an opportunity